Welcome to Cicada Rising, where fear takes flight and the truth lies in the shadows. Prepare to be captivated by true accounts of the supernatural, eerie encounters, and unexplained mysteries. Brace yourself for a journey into the shadows, where every whisper and every creak could be a harbinger of something beyond comprehension. Now let's begin. I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno. Diner name has of course been changed for obvious reasons. More on that later. Why do I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno? Well, because, kind stranger, my life plans didn't work out. Generally, if you're caught working at a diner past college, specifically one in the middle of nowhere, it might mean that things aren't going so hot. But still, why this diner? Why Lone Star specifically? I'm aware you probably aren't actually asking these questions, but I nonetheless believe they deserve a response. Of all of the diners in the world, what makes Lone Star so special is the pay. The pay is fucking great. There are maybe 10 other diners within a 30-minute drive from where I live. Most of them average out to a little over minimum wage. Meanwhile, Lone Star is whipping up a mean $50 an hour. And that hourly rate is due to one single solitary reason, no matter what anyone tells you. Because of him, my first day on the job was fine, more or less. I'd worked customer service before, so I felt like I could run with the strange surprises that came unique to diners. I was able to adapt to the inconsistency of the rules pretty quickly. Unwritten rules like, some areas in the restaurant need to be spotless at all times. Others, boss lady couldn't give less of a shit about. Serve customers quickly, but not too quickly, asshole. Customers here don't actually like it when you show up too fast. Give them some time to feel the floor under their boots, to miserably stare ahead, and mourn what could have been. You know, diner stuff. They're here because they want to be alone. Pardon the contradiction. Of course, vaguely defined, whispered only by ghosts' rules extended to the cooks as well. If you were somehow secretly celebrity chef Marco Pierre White in the flesh, your mandate was to keep your damn prowess to yourself. Your job is to make the classics as decently as possible. Not bad, but not amazing. Just poor enough to be really good. That's what the customers are here for. As the weeks unfolded, I rose, or I suppose crouched to the occasion quite well. You want intentional, pinpoint precision mediocrity. You've come to the right person. Most of the patrons just wanted coffee and brunch, brought to them at medium speed with a semi-predictable cadence of waiter or waitress check-ins afterwards. Done, done, and done. Not one for subtlety. One day, I finally decided to ask my boss the question in the middle of a shift. I didn't want to ruin a good thing by doubting it, but fuck me if I wasn't a little curious. Not a full look at the gift horse's mouth, more of a skeptical side-eye. Why $50 an hour? She didn't even look up from her task at the register, methodically counting out bills. Set it on your first day. You gotta be good at following the rules. And when it's an important rule, you'd better be damn well perfect. High expectations here. I made a face. Right, high expectations. You think I'm joking? No, ma'am, I guess I just... Why did I even speak up? I just think you're running a really cool operation here. Cooler than you might realize. It's still work, but the whole thing seems fair. Christ, my waffling skills were abysmal. Add that to the list of intentional mediocrity. Booyah. She looked up from her duties and shot me a stern look. I don't run this ship, and following the rules here means that you take care of yourself. I'm sorry? I am your employer, sure, and I'll pay you well to be here, sure, but you should be aware. There is plenty more going on here than just you and this diner. She glanced down at her watch, then sighed. I usually save this speech for the end of the month, but you already caught me halfway through it. So the Cole's notes. If you don't think you have it in you to follow instructions clearly, without protest, and without asking too many questions, then you should leave. Quit. No harm, no foul. A week's worth of pay on the house. The conversation sputtered shortly after that. I tried to find an opening to ask more about what she meant, but she was closed off to the topic moving forward. And you know what? That was fine. If she wanted me to put my head down and just do the work, I could do that. And work I did. And things were good. Mundane small talk with the customers was fun. My co-workers were friendly, and I was getting paid well. I'd found a place to park the failures of my life. A place to build from. It must have been a Saturday, I think, when I first noticed him. An occupied seat in the far corner of the diner. No idea how long he'd been sitting there and waiting, though he certainly looked patient. I had the strange inkling that he'd been left hanging for quite some time, though I couldn't actually remember seeing him enter. Brown corduroy shirt, short hair, mid-50s it seemed, a reasonably calm smile. Normal-looking dude. I started making my way out from the back and headed towards him. Immediately, I felt a tight grip on my arm. It was Melanie, my boss, with a forceful clutch, enough to make me drop my notepad. Her fingers tightened around my forearm, sharply pinching my skin. "Important rules," she said. "What? You remember our chat about rules? Well, this is the most important one. Okay? Okay. That man over there in the corner." She motioned to the man who had caught my attention, sitting upright, hands softly clasped together, coy smile across his face. "You don't go up to him. You don't say a word to him." "But he's a customer?" Her hold intensified. She was hurting me, almost as if she was taking out some sort of unseen anger on me. "I'd like to ask you right now to be smart enough to not ask questions and just follow instructions. You don't go to his table. You don't talk to him. You can look at him. You can shout across the room at him if you'd like, though I can't imagine why you'd ever need to do that. But you do not approach him, and you do not take his order." Or a sharp exhale through the nose, a shake of the head, and a glare from my manager. It's different every time, but it ain't pretty. I watched him from the short distance I'd been afforded. It was hard not to. She did too. Unlike the other customers here, I didn't get a sense that he was here to be alone, to reminisce, or to take part in the comfort ritual of a lackluster Eggs Benedict over rye. Instead, I had the sense that he was just curious, mild-mannered, content, but curious. My shift ended not too long after, so I didn't actually get a chance to watch him leave. Regardless, the experience of seeing him and learning about the rule he was connected to left a bizarre, dampening feeling on my mood. I liked my job. I liked coming home and unwinding. I didn't mind being in the middle of nowhere. It felt nice to look up at the empty sky filled with stars, to see them shimmer and shine, and even occasionally shoot across. I made a wish that things in my life would stay simple. I started to get a sense of his cadence. He'd usually show up once a month. The rare times I got to see him, I'd try to squeak in the odd question to my boss. Questions like, who is he? Where does he come from, and has anyone spoken with him? All mechanically met with I don't know, and if you're scared, you're welcome to quit. Then, as fate would have it, one day Boss Lady fell incredibly ill. My coworkers and I had to convince her to go home midway through her shift, her sickness falling, uncomfortably, within the usual 1 to 3 day window at the end of the month when our customer would typically appear. And of course, there he was, right after she went home. To my benefit, the other waiters and waitresses working the rounds were well aware of his presence and knew exactly what to do whenever he arrived. All of them knew to steer clear of him. Nevertheless, driven by a foundational curiosity that I just couldn't shake, I used this opportunity to go for it. I shouted a single thing across the floor, knowing Melanie wasn't there to chide me. "Hello, sir, what brings you here?" I asked him. He turned his head from his fixed position in his seat and put a hand to his ear. "Clever," I said. "What brings you here?" I called out again, a few notches louder this time, garnering some odd looks from our Thursday patrons. To my surprise, he spoke back. I'm not sure why I was expecting his voice to carry the tone of some twisted, demented demon. Maybe the fear Melanie had instilled in me. The man sounded exactly how he looked. "I'm sorry, dear," he said. "I'm afraid I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you come over here and ask me again?" "Nope." I was good. "And I don't mean to be rude about the service," he continued. but it feels as if no one has taken my order for quite some time now. I let the exchange end there, diverting my attention back to the other guests. As always, he'd eventually disappear without fanfare, without the clatter of the entrance bell or any sight or sound of his steps across the diner floor. Our backroom conversations about him remaining dreadfully short while he was there, just, he's here, and he's gone. And the odd, when we really needed to say it, I feel really weird about this. It took me a while to understand where my brazenness to address this strange, middle-aged man came from. In truth, I was just afraid. His presence and all of the questions tied to his being at our diner were disrupting this otherwise great arrangement that I felt I had. It seemed right, in the moment, to stand at the very edge of my bravery and say something to him. Of course, now that he was gone, I just felt worse. The next week, I was invited to something pretty interesting at work. I generally have a good amount of visibility into what Melanie, boss lady, does on a daily basis. The only element that remained elusive was her bi-weekly check-in with a particularly sharp-dressed agent-looking fella. There was a pretty consistent presence of state troopers, agents, and similarly uniformed men and women dropping into the diner, though I seldom paid it mind beyond simply noticing it. Midway through wiping down the tables, only an hour or so into my shift, Mel swung by and said, "Hey, want you in the meeting with the big boss if you have a few." The big boss? Sure, yeah, come in, just if you don't mind me asking, who is..." She let her eyes speak her unwritten rules to me. Question equals generally bad. "Thank you for the reminder, ma'am." We maneuvered to a back room and sat at a table. Across from us, already seated, was a man in a sharply tailored suit with a subtle earpiece in, the aforementioned agent. The table was littered with a small, messy stack of notes, papers, and documents. He made it a point to size me up, staring me down uninterrupted like a deer to headlights, no concern at all about how awkward he was making it for me. Then, he turned to Melanie. "How long she been here?" he asked her in his gruff western drawl. 6 months, she said. "You trust her?" "I trust her." "Yes." He let his eyebrows say, "If you say so," then went on with it. "All right, so apparently you had a visit from the wandering man last week. You," he said, motioning to Melanie, "we're out. But you..." Attention now shifted to me. "Weren't. Give me the lowdown." "The wandering man?" The agent caught the confusion in my eyes. "Jesus, you've told this girl nothing, haven't you?" he said to Melanie. "Sir, I know it sounds weird," she said, "but I personally feel as if the man is almost, I don't know, drawn to curiosity. Like, maybe the less I say to those not already in the know, the bet..." "Wandering man," the agent cut her off. "It's our nickname for the fella that sits in the corner of your fine little establishment. Or should I say, the state's fine little establishment." "I'm sorry?" I asked. "That's correct, the state's." "Congratulations, ma'am, you're part of a government operation. The wandering man, not just a cutesy little nickname, but our legal definition of this tricky little problem, is a phenomenon we discovered many years ago. At the time, he'd just walked the desert landscape, chatting up unsuspecting strangers with bizarre questions. Everything fine, all hunky-dory. A little weird, sure, but nothing illegal. However, sometimes, things would happen because of him. Bizarre things, grisly things. I could see Melanie groaning, concerned at the picture being painted. Would this pique my curiosity? "Have you guys, taken him in for..." I almost wanted to cut off my own stupid question, but he ran with it. "Nope. Not because we don't want to, but rather because it might not be safe." The cozy mental image I'd held of this diner was starting to fracture. "We have reason to believe that he's a visitor," he said. "From..." I didn't attend another debrief after that. Not because I was barred, mind you. Rather, I just didn't want to know anymore. My gut no longer held curiosity. There was just a low, aching dread there now. The agents and troopers spaced out and seated amongst the eatery were now just a glaring reminder of what my dingy diner job really was. The government cavalry would mostly show up around the end-of-month window the wandering man was set to arrive in. When he'd appear, they wouldn't do much more than examine him from their distant tables, subtly scribbling notes into notebooks. He'd always act the same. He would just sit there. He wouldn't give them or us, the diner employees, much to go on. Speaking of employees, I remembered something Melanie told me after my first month of working here, that the worker turnover at this diner was incredibly high. Knowing at the time what everyone got paid, it made absolutely no sense to me. Now, 5 months into the gig, alongside a completely new set of cooks, waiters, and waitresses from when I'd first started, I'd seen firsthand just how true her statement was. None of the leavers claimed as much, but I'm sure the underlying premise of who the diner was really for became subconsciously clear to them during their time here. And it probably didn't sit all too well with them. I stayed, but not because of the pay. I'm actually not sure why I did. We had a new cast of rookie employees now, the ones who understood the vague terms of the situation. Just as Melanie, I, and all former employees did stuck around. Those who couldn't reconcile the situation with their inherent curiosity naturally filtered out. And then there was Malcolm. It was only his first week. He was a keener, mega keener. He'd bulldozed through a giant list of tasks and was already asking for the next batch of work to chew through. Anything he could get ahead of, anything he could step in for, anything he could learn, he was on it. He wanted to be as helpful as humanly possible. I think the salary of the role for a guy his young age was just too alluring for him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to get him to pace himself. We were both giving the spiel now. By this point, we'd more or less perfected it. There are things about this diner that are strange. Rules you will have to follow and not think about. Rules that are concrete, immutable, and non-negotiable, like gravity. He nodded. At that moment, I really believed he was internalizing my words. And if that doesn't work for you, and if you don't think you can take care of yourself, then you shouldn't work here, I continued. There was always a visceral feeling in my stomach whenever I saw the wandering man in the corner during the same week that we were onboarding new staff. I'm sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Mel and I would both work the till, and if we saw anyone coming out from the back, we'd stop them with a simple grab of the arm. Malcolm stepped out, and I did just that, a rough grasp of his forearm, just like Melanie had done to me when I'd first started. He recoiled in surprise. "Remember that little chat about rules we just had?" I said. He nodded meekly, as if he was already in trouble. I pointed to the man seated at the far table in the brown corduroy shirt, staring straight ahead, with, what I believed at the time, no real reason to be here. And I said, "You will not, under any conditions, serve that man. Don't go up to him, don't talk to him. Pretend he doesn't exist." Malcolm lifted the garbage bag he was holding in his left hand. In my nervousness, I hadn't actually clocked what he was stepping out for. "Just doing garbage duty, ma'am," he said, but understood. And then he left out the front door with his usual swagger. The dumpster wasn't as close as we would have liked, so I appreciated his willingness to take on this duty so soon into his employment. I turned back to observe the wandering man. We had a crowd of agents in attendance that day, scattered about the restaurant. The man wasn't one to speak up often. Today was an interesting exception. "Officers," he said, "if you have any questions, feel free to join me at the table to ask them." The agents around the room reacted mainly with snickers. "Seriously, if you come sit with me, I'll be happy to spill it all, truly." Even more laughs, but no one bit, and yet he continued pointedly. "I know you're curious. I know you take notes. I know you talk about me. I know you built this establishment for me. I know you." As I reconciled the fact that this was the most words I'd ever heard him string together in succession, I heard the chime of the bell. A door had opened. Malcolm was dusting his hands as he entered through the diner's side door, a door which was situated right beside the table the wandering man was seated at. It all happened so fast, and yet it played out in front of me excruciatingly slowly, as if there was a moment, a single solitary second where I could have stepped in. The wandering man dropped any pretext of an exchange with the agents, stopping his sentence midway and adopting a completely new demeanor. He played the role of a low, miserable, tired man and said, 30 visits, terrible service every time, in a pathetic tone just as Malcolm walked by. Malcolm instinctively plucked a notepad out from his chest pocket and turned his head to face the man. "Hey, I got you, Chief. I can have him ring something up for you. What are you?" And then Malcolm froze in place, and the wandering man's expression turned Cheshire cat wide. His neck alternated between tensing and fluttering, with what seemed to be undeniable excitement. The man started getting up from the table, and then, immediately, both of them were gone. Malcolm and the wanderer had vanished out of existence entirely. The insanity of the moment was interrupted by the coded language I heard blared over a megaphone. Nonsensical agent speak that has been seared into my memory forever. Alert level black. Wandering target has compromised a civilian. I repeat, civilian has been compromised. And that was that. Melanie quit in the days after. She wasn't mad at me. She told me she always knew she'd leave after the 10th disappearance. Why that specific milestone was required, I have no clue. All I could do from that point was continue to work. On my commutes home, or during lunch breaks, I would look up at the stars and put out the wish that Malcolm be brought back home, back from wherever he'd been taken. The debrief with the agents brought me no solace. The exchange with them was simple and short. "Where was he taken to?" Answered with, "He's gone now." With a perpetual dagger in my soul now, I had only the smallest of silver linings, if you can even call it that. A lesson. The lesson that I needed to be even more watchful, even more diligent. And on days when the wandering man was visiting, the only server at the diner, no exceptions. I knew the agents weren't happy about that. None of them said it to me explicitly, but I could tell that they would learn something new about him every time he whisked someone away after a mistake was made. It was a weird Darwinian setup they had created. We were a zoo they could use to learn more about a specific animal, a specific entity, a specific visitor. No dice. They'd just have to watch him sit now, or wait for him to do something different. I waited for the 3-day stretch at the end of the month that he usually appears in. Things were quiet up until that point. When he finally showed up, it wasn't what I expected. For the first time ever, I saw the wandering man walk right through the front door. In the dead of night, at the tail end of my shift, I was at the till, paralyzed, as he took step after step to close the distance. And then he was right there, standing in front of me. And I was sure, absolutely sure, that I was going to die. He smiled. "Don't worry, I have my own little set of rules I play by," he said. I didn't say a word. This was no man's land right now. "I know you've been curious about me. I've admired it from the moment you first spoke up to address me. Cautious curiosity is a great thing to see in someone, especially in such a reckless species. Please just go. I'd like to answer a question about why I'm visiting. I'm sure you'd like to know why I'm here, right?" "I'm not curious anymore. I swear I'm not." He laughed. "The answer is really painfully simple. This little game, this little charade I'm playing, it is just so unbelievably fun. Please don't kill me. Please. You truly have a wonderful planet. I will return again soon. Promise. Give me a month, maybe 2 this time." A sincere, kind smile delivered with kind eyes. "I'll come back with a new game." And then he was gone. It took me a minute to realize that there was a cake box sitting on the counter beside me. Maybe it was there the whole time he was speaking to me. Maybe it materialized right after he left. I opened the box to find Malcolm's severed head, a blank expression on his face, sitting on a bed of poorly and confusingly organized flowers. Almost as if there was an intention to create a floral arrangement, but no understanding of what something like that would look like. On top of the horrific display, written in an almost childlike handwriting, was a note that read, "I brought him back just like you wished." The worst thing about being trapped at a diner in the middle of nowhere is that you realize that there really is nowhere else to run to. Every single part of our planet is blanketed by stars, by open sky. Someone could drop in any time. I want to start off by saying that I don't know exactly what I expect to get out of this. I think you might be able to help me, but I don't really know how you could. Maybe you can't. It's the only option I have at this point, in any case. I don't know what else to do. If you can't help me, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know what's going to happen to me anymore. I really need your help. I'm a 911 dispatcher. Or I was. I had been doing it for about 9 years now. It was a nice job. Well, one that puts food on the table, at the very least. I was good at it. Not a lot of people could take a job like that, but it was not too bad for me. Though there have been hundreds of dire events people have called for, it was rather uneventful for myself. I just sit in that room, answering call after call. Nothing much happens in that room. Nothing much happened to me in general. I had a pretty ordinary, uneventful life. About a year ago, I'd say, this woman called in. No phone number. It happened sometimes our department spent our money on things other than an upgraded phone system. But that's beside the point. She called in about a burglary that was about to happen in this rather poor part of town. She hung up pretty fast. I couldn't get in a word, but I don't know. I guess I didn't think too much of it. It was not often that a person called in regarding something going to happen rather than something already happening. But it happens sometimes. Sometimes people catch wind of a crime through word of mouth or see someone suspicious in their neighborhood before they do anything and don't know who else to call. I thought that this was one of those instances and handled it accordingly. I informed the police, and the police staked out the house that was supposed to get burglarized. Sure enough, a couple of guys tried to break into the place. They were caught before they could even get through the window they had broken open, from what I had heard. A few days later, this woman called again. I thought her voice sounded familiar. She had this uniquely monotone voice, emotionless. She sounded so familiar, but admittedly, I didn't think too much of that either. I guess I just heard too many voices. They all blurred together and sounded the same sometimes. Her number didn't show up on the screen again. She called in about an assault. It hadn't happened yet. This felt odd to me. Assaults like this seemed like typically an in-the-moment thing. It usually was not planned ahead enough for someone else to know about it. I had a strange feeling about it, but she had hung up just as quickly as she had the first time, without letting me get a word in. Of course, I informed the police again. The man was caught at the exact time and place that the woman on the call had said, trying to assault a woman on the street, and with a knife. It didn't seem premeditated. The news articles said that the man was drunk. I was a little confused and actually pretty concerned. How did this woman on the phone know? But I didn't have many options. Her calls didn't come with a phone number after all. I couldn't just call her back to ask. That wasn't part of my job anyways. The police didn't ask. A couple weeks went by after that. Business as usual. Regular 911 calls. I don't believe I heard that voice again once for that entire duration. I wish it had stayed that way. She called again. Her voice struck me as familiar right off the bat this time. I recognized it now. I knew it was her. This call, however, was far more concerning to me than the previous one. She said that my house was going to get broken into. She didn't say it like that. She didn't say that it was my house directly. She said that a house would get broken into. I asked her for the address, and the address that she gave me was mine. It took me a second to process this fully. It was so unexpected that my brain just took a second to click. I finally registered it, that this familiar-sounding address was mine. What? But she had already hung up. Of course she had already hung up. I sat there for a second, in shock. I couldn't call her back because of course her phone number hadn't shown up again. We didn't have a way of tracing calls or anything. We would need to get the police in for something like that. I didn't have many options here. I did what I had done for the last 2 incidents. I informed the police, and they sent a cop to stake it out. I was still at work when it happened. Sure enough, a couple hours later, some guy tried to break in, and they caught him. They called me after the incident to inform me of this. It was my house after all. I didn't really know what to make of this. Not yet. I had recognized that woman as being the same woman from her previous 2 calls. It was already strange enough that she knew these crimes were going to happen beforehand each time, but it was too strange of a coincidence that one of the crimes happened to me. I didn't know what to do. Guess I had hoped that it truly was just that, a coincidence, just a strange coincidence. Admittedly, I was scared to go home that night. I lingered at work for as long as I could, stalling for time, but eventually, my boss made me leave. I drove home, probably going under the speed limit. I was a nervous wreck. The police caught the burglar. What was there to be scared of? I just couldn't shake this ominous feeling off. About the caller, the woman. How did she know my house was going to get broken into? I tried to tell myself that perhaps she was just somehow well informed of crimes. Maybe she knew some people, heard things through word of mouth or something. I don't know. But the ominous feeling wouldn't go away. When I arrived in my driveway, it was dark out. I always got home pretty late. I really did not want to step out of my car. I looked out all of my windows, squinting at the bushes and behind all my neighbors' cars and fences for any sign of someone watching my home, or me. I don't know why, again, I just had a feeling. I didn't see anyone. After probably 20 minutes of this, I worked up the courage to step out. I finally left my car and went up to my house. Everything was fine, normal. No real sign of the burglary. The cop caught him before any real damage could be done, after all. The police had suggested I leave work when the actual attempt had happened, but I was so shaken up by the call, I told them I would come by the police station to talk about it the day afterwards. I guess I just wanted to be there, at the call station, in case she called again. Anyways, I stepped inside. Nothing out of the ordinary. Of course, the burglar never actually got to go inside. I should have expected nothing to be out of place, but I checked everywhere anyway. I checked my closets too, and under my bed. I was paranoid. No one had tried to break into my house before. I was pretty shaken up. I did not sleep well that night, if at all. I was happy to leave for work the next day. Anything to get out of there. I was expecting another call from the woman the next day. Every time the phone rang, my heart sank a little. It was going to be her, but it never actually was. The day went by like any normal day. I stopped by the police station afterwards. I needed to, anyways, to get some things sorted out regarding the burglar, but I told them about the incident too, fully. I explained to them the strange caller. There wasn't much they could do about it. It did not put me at ease, but I guess I was glad that they knew too. I didn't sleep very well that night either. The days and nights went on like this for a while, expecting the woman each day with every call, being paranoid in my own home. It was exhausting, but she never did call. Nothing ever did happen to me. I never looked out the window and saw a face staring back at me, watching my house, watching me. Things just went by as usual. I chalked it all up to myself being paranoid. It was just a coincidence. That's what I convinced myself. I convinced myself that nothing was unusual, that everything would be okay. A couple months went by. I had practically forgotten about it all. She never called the 911 operating station again. I finished up one day, clocked out of work, grabbed a water bottle from the vending machine in the front lobby. I was about to step outside and head to my car when I got a phone call. I took my phone out of my jacket and checked it. No number. All right, I thought it was probably a spam call or something. Those usually didn't come with a number, you know. Usually they said spam caller, but again, didn't think too much of it. I declined it. I wasn't one to answer spam calls. I reached for the door handle again. That's when my phone started ringing again. I checked it. No number. That feeling from before, the ominous feeling, started creeping back into me. I answered this time. It was silent on the other line for a couple seconds, but those couple seconds went by for far too long as I stood there, silently, anticipating something. I don't know what. Then she spoke. It was her. The caller from before. My blood ran ice cold. I paused, horrified. I recognized that voice, that tone, immediately. It was her. She greeted me. She hadn't done that before, which was not too unusual for a 911 call. People usually aren't going to bother with greetings and pleasantries before telling me about their emergencies, after all. She didn't either, but she greeted me this time. "Hello," she said so simply in that monotone voice of hers. I was so in shock, so taken aback and unprepared that I just could not get any words out after opening my mouth. There were a couple more awful seconds of silence before she continued on. "If you step outside, you will get hurt." She hung up. Just like that, she hung up. My jaw was still agape, wordless. I didn't get to say a thing before she hung up. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I was frozen in front of the glass door in front of me. "If you step outside, you will get hurt?" I finally snapped out of it and quickly backed far away from the front door. I ducked into a nearby hallway, where the elevators were, away from any glass doors or windows. That was that woman from before, the caller, from the burglary incident, the one who knew. How did she know I was about to leave? Was she outside the building watching me through the door? The timing was far, far too perfect. How did she find me? And what did she mean by, "I will get hurt"? If she really was out there, was she about to hurt me? I stood in that hallway with the elevators for ages. I didn't know what to make of the situation, but I sure as hell was not stepping outside. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified. My legs were shaking. I could barely breathe. I tried to call her back, fearfully, but the call could not go through. Not without a number to call back to. Finally, I called an elevator and went back up to where my coworkers were still getting ready to leave. I must have looked so scared. They were able to tell right off the bat that something was off. I told them what had happened. I told them about the incident a few months ago, too. I was lucky to have such sweet, caring coworkers. One of them, a buddy, a coworker named Trevor, offered to walk with me outside. Trevor was a big guy, strong. I felt a little safer with this idea. If this woman came up to me to hurt me, I was sure Trevor would be able to protect me. I was still scared, to be sure. But if Trevor was there, maybe we could safely find the caller and put a stop to this all. We went back down the elevators, Trevor and I. I was still terrified. He went outside first. I didn't want to linger too far behind. I didn't want to be alone. I stuck close behind him and stepped outside as well. The chill of the night air hit me fast. It was dark out, apart from the light shining from the sidewalk lanterns by the entrance and out of the upstairs windows, where some of my co-workers still were. They were probably watching us. Nothing happened at first. Trevor and I both looked around, observing our surroundings, looking for her in the darkness. I stood beside him, still sticking rather close to the entrance. Then, I heard a noise. It happened so fast, I didn't have time to process anything. Trevor didn't either. I looked beside me, at Trevor, just in time to watch an air conditioning unit fall from an upper floor, straight onto his head. Trevor collapsed just as fast as soon as it hit him. I heard a sickening noise, one of hard metal hitting soft flesh. Another, far louder noise rang through the air as the unit hit the ground. He laid there, sprawled out on the floor, completely unmoving, the AC beside his head. I stared at his body in horror. He didn't move. Of course he didn't move. I was again frozen in place, shaking. I watched as his head started slowly bleeding dark crimson onto the concrete. It started pooling around the AC unit, started dripping off of the sidewalk and into the grass. There was scrambling behind me, a door opening. I was pushed out of the way, still glued in place, and a couple of my co-workers surrounded Trevor's body. Someone ran inside to call for an ambulance. I felt sick to my stomach. I vomited onto the concrete below me, but I couldn't look away. I didn't realize until much later that night, after the entire incident was over and I was able to safely make it back home. After the paramedics took Trevor away, after we were told he had died on the spot, that I had gotten a single cut on my cheek. Some of the blood had trickled down from the cut, trickled down onto my jaw and dried there. I hadn't even noticed. So much was going on. One of the sidewalk lanterns had burst when the unit hit the ground hard. The glass had cut my cheek. I had gotten hurt. Trevor had gotten hurt. Would I have been the one hit by the AC unit if I hadn't gotten that call? Surely not. It was horrific timing, but it fell on its own, didn't it? The woman had completely slipped my mind during the incident. I realized this later too. Was she out there? Did she see it happen? Did she plan this somehow? How did she know? I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after that, or the day after that. I was terrified, scared out of my mind. I stayed locked in my room, curtains shut. I didn't know what to do. I constantly checked my phone, waiting for her to call again. I blamed myself for Trevor's death, blamed the woman, blamed the police for not helping me find her. I picked my phone up time and time again. I tried to find ways to call her back, scoured the internet for ways to figure out who called me. Nothing worked. I couldn't do anything. I didn't get any sleep. It was awful. My boss came by after a couple weeks or so. He was kind. He knew the entire incident was horrifying for me. He let me stay home for a while on paid leave, no bothering me. It was considerate of him. He came to check on me because I hadn't been answering any calls. Not when there was a possibility I'd miss one from her if I did so. That was kind of him too. I let him in. I was hesitant. Opening the front door was scary, and the daylight behind him was blinding considering I had kept all my curtains closed for that entire 2 weeks. We sat on my couch. He told me he understood how traumatizing the situation must have been for me. He told me he got it, and they were all sad about Trevor's death too. But I needed to come back into work again. I understood. I expected as much when I saw him through the peephole. He offered a ride, said I could come back today, said that maybe being around my other co-workers again might help. I didn't exactly want to. I felt wrong about it. I felt as if leaving my house would open up opportunities for that woman to find a way to hurt me. Even more so, I felt that being at work would increase my chances of missing her call. I told him as much, but he said he would have to let me go if I didn't come back to work. I wanted to refuse, but I didn't have much of a choice. Part of me also wondered if perhaps answering calls there again could entice the woman to call again instead. Maybe I won't freeze up this time. Maybe I could ask her immediately who she was, what she wanted. I hesitantly agreed and accepted his invitation for a ride. He stood back up, pleased. He asked if I needed any time to get ready, and I said I didn't. He asked if he could use my bathroom first, and I said to go right ahead. As soon as I heard the bathroom door lock, I got the call. No number. My stomach churned, but I was ready. My phone almost fell out of my hand in excitement. I answered, fast. My entire being was shaking. And there it was, that same voice. She said it just like how she had said it before. Hello. I didn't hesitate this time. Who are you? What are you doing to me? How do you know? Silence. A few seconds of silence. I was on the edge of my seat, breathless, waiting. If you get in that car with him, you will die. She hung up as soon as she finished the final word. What? What are you saying to me? Come back! I yelled into my phone, screaming hopelessly, even though she was no longer on the other line. No answers. I still knew nothing. Absolutely nothing. My boss rushed back out of my bathroom, clearly concerned. He sat back down next to me, comforted me. I told him about what had happened. He searched my house with me, but we found nothing. No one. How could she have heard our conversation? How did she know I was about to leave with him? He thought that maybe she had some sort of listening device on my phone. I didn't even hesitate. I threw it at the wall, slammed it against the counter, cracking the glass. I turned it off, opened my front door, and threw it as hard as I could into the street. I begged my boss not to go. He offered me a ride to the police station instead of work. I refused. If I get in that car with him, I will die. He called the police for me with his own phone before leaving. He waited with me until they arrived, then left for work. I begged him not to go, insisting that something would happen to him on the way. He had to get to work, though. He thought it was nonsense. A car crash. A 3-car pile-up. His was T-boned. It was fatal. They said it was a drunk driver. She couldn't have known, but she knew. If I went with him, I would have been dead. I was not going into work at that point. Again, the police could do nothing for me. The call was untraceable, useless assholes. I stayed home, I didn't care. I needed to get to the bottom of this. I bought a new phone, I waited. I got them to put my old number, the one from the phone I had broken and tossed away, onto the new one. I checked it obsessively throughout each day, waiting for that call from her. I looked up different ways to immediately trace a call. I could try a couple right after a call had ended, if only she would call. And she did. It was as if she somehow sensed my newfound resolve, my vigor. She started calling more often, predicting things for me. I had expected more death sentences, more warnings of a future demise, but it quickly became smaller things. She would call, greet me in that same voice, that same old hello, and warn me of things like a future power outage or an unlocked window. At one point, she knew of my expired milk. I'm notoriously bad at checking expiration dates, but I knew to check the milk before pouring it into my Fruit Loops. The calls became more and more frequent. My attempts at tracing never worked, but I always came up with new ideas to try and find out who she was. I would try to listen closely for any background noise that could give me a hint as to her location, or I would try to hang up right after the hello to see if anything would change. Nothing worked out for me, but it became sort of exciting. It was a game of cat and mouse. I wanted to find her. I was ready for every call, anticipating them. I had nothing else to do. I was fired from my job. I didn't even care. I became excellent at heeding her each and every warning. Nothing bad happened to me anymore. I was in complete control. I was actually grateful. I didn't even care that she somehow knew what I was doing and what was going to happen to me at all hours of the day. I just wanted to know who she was. My guardian angel. Nothing bad was going to happen to me with her watching over me. She made me feel so safe. I relied on her. The woman called me one night, as I was sleeping. I picked up happily, nevertheless, as had become the norm. Hello. Same monotone voice. She was the only person who called me anymore. Hi, I answered, grinning. They see me. She hung up. I sat there for a second, processing. They see me. This was the first time she referred to herself, the first time she didn't give me a warning. I didn't know how to react. I sat there, motionless, shocked. They see me. I jumped out of bed, now genuinely distraught. What? I paced for the rest of the night, waiting for another call. I waited for something to happen, waited for it to make sense. Nothing. Days went by without a call from her. Bad things started happening to me again. Things I had stopped looking out for. Days and days. Weeks. I checked news articles, Facebook, radio stations. Did the police find her before I did? There wasn't anything about it anywhere, if so. I called the station. They had no idea what I was talking about. I kept all my curtains open, my doors unlocked, hoping she'd show herself, show how she knew what was happening in my life, come back. I looked out my windows hoping to see a face peering in at me. One never did. Weeks and weeks, a month or so had passed, I don't know anymore. I think I lost track. I miss her. I don't know how the woman knew everything that was going to happen in my life, but I miss her. I need to know who she was. I don't know who could have found her. I don't know what's going to happen to me anymore, and I'm terrified. I need to find her. I don't feel safe anymore. Something's going to happen to me. As we conclude this bone-chilling installment of Cicada Rising, we urge you to join our community by liking, sharing, and subscribing. To submit your own stories, contact us at mhpicadon@gmail.com, including Cicada Rising in the subject line. Until our paths cross again, remember, the darkness is only as frightening as the secrets it conceals. Stay vigilant, stay connected, and keep the fear alive with Cicada Rising.